All right, hello, welcome everyone to Weird West Radio on Rain Man Digital. I am Michael, your host. If you're new to Weird West Radio, you can find all of our shows past, present, and in the future wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search Weird West Radio. All right, so in the studio with me today to talk about a Western is David. Hello, David.
Hello, everybody.
So the Western that you and I are going to be discussing is the 2024 Western film titled Calamity Jane, directed by Terry Miles, written by Leon Langford and Colin Watts. Comes in with a lean 95-minute running time. Calamity Jane is a 2024 Western film. It is a fictionalized story based around the life of Martha Jane Canary, known as Calamity Jane, and she seeks revenge following the death of Wild Bill Hickok. The film is a Tubi Films original, but was made available on video on demand by Samuel Goldwyn Films on the 2nd of February 2024. The official synopsis reads, after Wild Bill is killed in a poker game, Calamity Jane must break out of prison and seek revenge before the Deadwoods sheriff can arrest them. So this Western film reminds me a lot of the old B-Westerns of the late 60s and 70s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those Westerns that basically definitely gives me the vibes. If this was made back in the 70s, it would fall probably within like more exploitation type of Western.
And it's not, that's not to say it's amateurish. It's low budget. And there's a difference between a low-budget film and an amateur film.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I wasn't quite sure going in to watch this film, whether or not it was going to be an amateur effort or at least a professional low-budget effort. And I know the names associated with the film are somewhat well-known in geek circles. So I figured, okay, there's no way this is going to be amateur. This is going to have to be... There's going to have to be some skill behind this film in order for Stephen Amell to want to be involved in a project like this.
Yeah.
And happily, that's what this film is. It's a low-budget effort into the Western genre, and it is not amateur. And the reason why I was even afraid of that, Dave, is because you and I both, because we're involved in the Western circles, we know that there has been a surge of awful, dare I even call them movies, that are now made available on Amazon, Tubi,
Yes,
Netflix. They're just buying up content in general. And there are people who are amateur filmmakers who say, I think I'm going to make a Western. And then they get some non-important distribution deal. I'm just being blunt, because it's when I say non-important, it means they're not making money.
yes. And that's the thing, is kind of like when you get down to it in today's world, especially with the power of streaming nowadays, it has gotten much easier.
Yes.
For more amateur directors and filmmakers to get their movies out there.
Yeah.
It's much easier nowadays.
And it's blurred the line. And I don't have a problem watching amateur films. There's plenty of amateur films that are very well put together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And are not insulting to sit down and spend a couple hours to watch. However, with the advent of the amateur film, specifically the Western, it's blurring the lines between B film and what I would call like Z films.
Yes. Well, especially
when I say blurring the line, I'm not talking about you watching it and not knowing what it is. I'm talking about looking at titles in your digital dashboard, whether it be through Tubi or Amazon, and you're looking for something to watch, and you come across a Western that might have some snazzy artwork, and you're like, I'm going to push play. And that's what I mean by the dilution of the B film and a Z film, because you don't know what you're about to watch. There's nothing that clues you in.
Oh, yeah. And that's I mean, nowadays, it's just not even with the Western genre. I mean, even the horror genre was probably the first quote unquote genre that had this issue where everything became diluted.
You're right.
There was something that basically a B movie was cool. It was like a B movie can be a cult classic.
Even sometimes a C film
And
could be
sometimes a
pretty
C film.
fucking cool.
Oh yeah, and like me and you have covered actually some of those C films on this network.
Yes.
That have become cult classics.
Couple Van Damme classics.
But like when you get to that, unfortunately nowadays, because the market's so saturated now with everybody that believes that they are a low budget filmmaker and can immediately get distribution thanks to streaming, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Tubi, even nowadays, even like with Pluto TV is actually starting to get into that market. And it's like, because with their channels, like I think it's like they tried 1 month of the Shaw Brothers doing old Hong Kong films. And you see that dilution. And of course, those C and D grade movies suddenly are considered B films.
Yeah. And that's as a Western, forget being a Western fan, a film enthusiast, I don't want that dilution.
Yeah.
I don't mind Z films or amateur films having a place on the market. I think that's only fair. I'm not going to gatekeep whether or not you should or shouldn't make a movie, but it does get exasperating as a film fan when you're trying to look for those gems. Let's say, for example, let me backtrack, but years past when we used to go into video stores, some of the best gems were those films sitting on the rack and you've never heard of it.
Yes.
And you might see an actor in there that you are familiar with, but everyone else is someone that's a relative unknown. And you pick it up, you rent it, and you go home, watch it, and you're so happy that you found this gem.
Yes.
Those gems are harder to find because of the dilution. That's my problem. Because now I don't even want to look for those gems because I'm afraid I'm going to be stuck watching the opening 15 minutes of some bullshit amateur Z film.
Yes. Think about it like this. Just for me on a personal level, when it comes to the people talking about B films and Z films and D films.
And mind you, they're barely even films. That's my problem.
I had this funny moment where someone actually looked at me and says, "David, how does it feel to be considered a B movie filmmaker?" And I looked at him and says, I point blank told him, I don't consider myself a B movie filmmaker because I'm not that good yet.
Oh, wow. What are you, an F?
I consider it low tier. Like, basically, like, I'm in the Z films where it's basically like, the films that I do are fun.
You have made some Z films, but you're also not trying to pawn it off.
I'm not trying to pawn it off as a B film because everyone assumes B films nowadays are cult classics.
Yeah.
And because you can just simply put B film on your movie, suddenly you get like this audience thinking that a Z film that's amateur is a B film. And I'm like, no.
This, let's do an even better comparison. I think the Walmart bargain bin is probably more on the forefront of people's minds than, say, Blockbuster. Yes. So forget the rack analogy I used a second ago, or metaphor analogy. Let's think of the bargain bin.
Yeah, the $1.99 bin.
Even the bargain bin, when you were digging through that bin looking for some gem of a movie, you would never accidentally grab a Z film because they weren't there. They were usually B films or low budget studio pictures, which bleeds into B films. But my point is that we don't even have that, because if you're reaching into the digital bargain bin in today's environment, you might accidentally grab a pile of shit. All right, so there's a substantial amount of talent involved in the production. The elements that don't work or are less than stellar are more issues of budget rather than skill, in my opinion. Where the film succeeds is in its disregard for so-called historical accuracies. Calamity Jane is often closely associated with myth. We know this. Mm-hmm. The character is more of a fabrication of fabricated stories, than an actual true historical figure. That is not to say she didn't exist. There is plenty of historical data that substantiates her existence. However, much of what we know of her comes from her own embellished retellings of adventures that cannot be validated now, nor even then when they were told.
Mm-hmm.
What makes this film work is its willingness to use the character's mythological components, which actually better align with the themes this figure has come to represent.
Mm-hmm.
And these themes include adventure and frontier spirit. In many ways, the myth of Calamity Jane embodies the spirit of the American frontier, specifically the mythological components. She was known for her adventurous nature, often moving across the Western territories and engaging in various occupations traditionally dominated by men. That takes me to my next point, breaking gender norms. She defied the conventional roles of women in the 19th century. That is historical. We do know that.
We do know this.
Dressed in men's clothing, she worked as a scout, nurse, and even a soldier. Her ability to navigate traditionally male spaces made her an icon of gender nonconformity. So these are things that we know, but also have been layered with myth on top of it. And that's why a movie like this works. I feel like if you have a character who is not beholden to historical pillars, but has more of a free range to move because of its mythological proportions, then why stick to fake history? Allow your character some latitude to do something within the story. And that's, for me, the best part of this movie. The fact that they weren't willing to behold to, air quotes, fake history and allow this character to kind of just move through this story without having to tie her down to history that can't really be validated. And the script has a solid first act where relationships and key characters are effectively established, leaving us with a definitive idea of where the story will go.
Mm-hmm.
The movie loses itself a bit during the second act, even though that is where most of the character development happens or takes place.
Yeah.
Especially, there's a scene between the gravedigger and Calamity Jane during the second act, which is probably one of the most strongest portions of this entire movie. And the third act brings the film to a satisfying conclusion for the most part. David, what are your initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts on, before I ever press play on Tubi to actually see this, I wasn't expecting, my expectations for Calamity Jane, even after seeing the trailer, were relatively low. And I think that that is something that you have to be fair with. Just like what you said in the beginning of the show, Calamity Jane you cannot compare Calamity Jane to, say, something like a major motion picture Western that's being released out there. You just can't. You can't compare it to, say, something like Old Henry, which me and you have covered.
Mm-hmm.
Because the differences in budget and production are so different between the two. What you have to look at is the substance within Calamity Jane. Did they actually give us a decent story that followed through? Was there substance behind the characters? Did they follow through with a lot of things? Or was it like a disjointed mess? And honestly, when you take a look at it, after I viewed it for the first time, I'm like going, they gave us a solid story from bookend to bookend. I like how they used certain Western tropes to help their story along. I enjoyed actually like the cheesy moments of the chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, because it's kind of like, yeah, the old Western storytelling could be told like in those ways. And in a lot of ways, it helped keep its narrative flowing. You know, you knew that basically, okay, you're at your midway point, you're at your third act, your second act, it knew where its pacing was.
Correct.
And
it even gave you those little flags, like those title sequences, to clue you in. Hey guys, we do have a path.
We do have a path. There's nothing going on, nothing off that we're going to be doing. It's not an experimental film.
No.
right? So that already separates it from Z-grade films.
The difference between, because you bring up Old Henry, and at first I thought that was an odd comparison, but it's not, because Old Henry is not a B film, and it's not an amateur film because of its content and attention to style and form. It's something that I would call an art film in
An
a
art
lot of
film.
ways. It's an art film that happens to be dressed within the Western aesthetic. Calamity Jane may be similar in budget, but I would not classify it as an art film.
No.
Simply because of its form and style.
Exactly. And that's why I was like, going into this, I was actually pretty comfortable watching this. And throughout the entire moment, I've had some really great moments. It's not like groundbreaking.
No.
Right?
No.
But is it entertaining? Yeah. It is pretty entertaining.
Is it hate-worthy? No.
No. It's not hate-worthy. And like that is the ultimate thing that I would tell people is like, if you're going to is Calamity Jane worth your time? Sure, depending on like what you want.
If you want to, throw back a couple shots of whiskey, maybe drink a beer, eat dinner, flip the movie on, I don't feel like people are going to be pissed off watching this.
No, that was the amazing thing because I did exactly what you just said. I flipped it on. I started eating dinner. It was like the perfect dinner movie. And, there'd be times when I'd be cracking up. And there's times I'm like going, oh, okay, there's actually really good, solid story moments.
And I'm sure the stuff you're cracking up about is the same things that I was cracking up about. Because we're not trying to convince people that this is the best movie ever made.
Yeah.
We're coming out the gate swinging because there's a lot of negativity around this movie within the Western circles, and I don't think people know what they're watching.
Well,
because like this movie, I think it has like a 55% right now or 45%,
45,
and it hasn't even been reviewed by so-called professionals yet.
Yeah.
If you go to Rotten Tomatoes, it's only been reviewed by fans, and when I saw that it was sitting at 45%, a 45% audience score, that kind of took me aback just a bit because I was pretty shocked. I expected maybe like a low 60 to high 60.
Yeah.
But I don't agree with the general consensus around this movie. I think the biggest problem with the film is that it fails to fully immerse the viewer in its myth. And I know I was talking about how great it was at the beginning when it comes to the mythological components, but it's a double-edged sword in that regard because the story of Wild Bill has been told so many times.
Yes.
His death needed to really punch through and push us to root for Calamity Jane. And I was rooting for the character simply because I knew she was the protagonist, but the narrative itself never fully managed to pull us into her world and everything that comes with that. And it would have been amazing to see the writers work within the myth itself by playing a bit more, using myth to subvert expectations.
Yeah.
If they were willing to go against the general stories that have been told about Calamity Jane, and they were willing to do something slightly different, then I would ask, well, how come you didn't use that myth then? It has so much latitude there to subvert the expectations. Instead, they use inherent latitude of myth to try and sell a love story.
A love story between
Wild Bill and Calamity Jane. And I kind of question that decision. Like, you're doing so much here that goes against what people generally accept is the story of Calamity Jane.
Yeah.
And the latitude that you're given, you use to simply create this love story between the two of them that's already been contested in history for countless decades.
Yeah.
And we know that those were probably made-up stories embellished by Calamity Jane herself. There's no proof or evidence to say that they were together, so you are playing with myth. So if you're going to do that, then why not use it more effectively?
Yes. Because, like, think about it. The strongest points to me in Calamity Jane is when they're not dealing with the death of Wild Bill himself. They're dealing with the ramifications. They're dealing with the
Yes.
points where Calamity or Jane is by herself and she has to deal with that grief.
Yes.
And it fits. That's when it starts to me clicking, when it's all of a sudden, like the moments where she's alone in the cabin and after the sheriff tries to arrest her the first time, and she has that moment to all of a sudden digest the fact that Bill's dead. And then the gravedigger scenes with her and the gravedigger, more personal moments of Jane dealing with the loss of someone or something. If they wanted to focus in on the Wild Bill element, I'm like you. I felt like they should have tied that more with Wild Bill. Like give us more elements between, okay, show us more of that personal side of Jane that probably Bill has only seen.
That's what they should have done.
Yes.
Because I feel like they missed an opportunity. Because they have all this myth they can fuck around with. Look what Deadwood did with Calamity Jane. They fucked with that myth the entire run of the show, and it was so beautifully done. And again, to be fair to them, or to be fair to the producers of Calamity Jane, this movie we're talking about, there's a big difference between TV with HBO, mind you, and also the medium of television in itself allows for way more development of character. So, but I do feel like they missed an opportunity because the bare bones plot lacked depth and complexity that could have been achieved by delving deeper into the legendary status of Calamity Jane and the themes she represents. You're using Calamity Jane, but you're not using all of those themes that come with her.
Yeah, because they're using it almost like superficially, because you have those moments when even like some of the characters around Calamity Jane are talking about her mythos, are talking about like, oh, this is who Calamity Jane is. Right. But it's only like very superficial. They don't really dive more into it. And that's why I feel is like,
well, that's why Dave, the best part of the movie for me was there's a few parts, and it does take place during the second act. It's when she talks to the gravedigger, because you get a sense of who she is as a person, rather than just the myth and this stoic, revenge-seeking, double pistol-wielding killer. We get to see her be her, and also be vulnerable in a way that makes her far more interesting. And that always works with characters like Calamity Jane, because we know that they overcompensate. Calamity Jane has always been portrayed that way. That's why she's given masculine traits a lot of times, because there has been numerous things that I've read that, yes, there are multiple stories saying that she was bisexual, and obviously she's non-gender conforming, so she's going to act a little more masculine, but why not have fun with that masculinity?
Yeah. And it's like
they could have done more, and a lot of that goes to, as I was saying, form. Their lack of film vocabulary and utilizing that's not the right word, vocabulary, but their lack of use of film form. That's the best way to say it. Their lack of use of film form.
Yeah.
Narrative, mise en scène, cinematography, editing, sound. You want to create a better, stronger picture, then you should probably pay attention to your images more, because that was also a problem I had. Cinematography in itself was beautiful for the most part.
For the most part.
But where was the color grading?
Exactly.
I felt like the stuff they did color grade, specifically during the opening minutes, was way overexposed.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't even tell if that was white sand or snow.
Or
I still don't know if it's snow.
I couldn't even
white
tell.
Sand.
I couldn't even tell if there were times when I was like going, does that background really exist? Or is it something that basically they
a digital matte.
They digital matted it.
That's what I was thinking too.
Some of the shots, like in the early goes, I loved. I loved a lot of the opening drone shots of the mountainside and everything else. But there was something off about the color that I was like going, it looks great, but it's almost like you needed to touch up or go further with your with your editing. And
there's a few moments, David, with where it simply looks like digital.
Yeah.
And you're not paying attention to your color grade, which color grading, just to keep it extremely simple for people that may not be familiar with that term, I'm gonna explain it very simply. Color. You're overlaying a layer of color over your film. And when you do that, you are bringing all of the depth together. So if you have visual effects, let's say you have a digital matte that you're using for your background. Let's say you didn't really shoot in front of a large mountain. So you have to put that mountain through different techniques pertaining to compositing.
Yeah.
You put it behind them. Let's just keep it simple again. A green screen. Think of the green screen effect. And then you put in that digital matte later of the background. That's fine. It works. So many movies do it, and you don't even
notice it.
This movie, however, there are various moments where, yes, some of those landscape shots were legit, but then some of them were obviously digital mattes. And I feel like a careful attention to detail via color grading would have helped blend those scenes together, because color grading will always help your digital shots look more seamless and organic within the total composition in the frame.
Yeah. Basically, at the end of the day, when you actually look at like what they visually were able to do, they did really great. It just needed polish. And that's what I think overall this film really needed, was just that you need to take those extra steps to polish up your film, make sure it's nice and clean, make sure the editing cuts work. And that in itself is basically just shows that basically even unpolished, Calamity Jane still looked great.
Yeah. I mean, there were great moments, action sequences. There were really good action sequences. I feel like the best one, again, in my opinion, there's a couple. The ending was fun.
Yeah, the ending was fun.
The ending shootout was fun, but also I love the gravedigger scene when they were first entering the Badlands. And she's inside the coffin, and she comes out like a badass, just rolls right out of the coffin, stands up, double shoots.
Yeah.
I mean, it was good. I didn't have a problem with it. There were some really cool Western action sequences, but ultimately, David, that's, I think, the chosen genre, not the Western genre, but the fact that they were attempting to make an action film as opposed to a drama.
Yes.
And I feel like this movie probably would have worked better because of the budget, would have worked better as a drama with action sequences.
Yeah. In a lot of ways.
Don't you think that if it was categorized as a drama, if that was your intention, you would have had those moments that we were talking about that needed to be
polished up?
Yeah. Specifically interactions between characters, better character development. A lot of that would have come through naturally because of the change in style and form, because of it being not an action film per se, but a drama.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, when you take a look at Calamity Jane, the filmmaker, I can't remember who exactly was the director. If there's a criticism
for Calamity Jane, Terry Miles. If there is one criticism I would say for Terry Miles is like, choose what your movie is about. Because just like you said, does he want it to be a drama or does he want it to be an action film? And the funny part is that is a typical mistake we see a lot in like old spaghetti westerns, especially the ones that me and you have covered in the past, where it's like the spaghetti western doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be a comedy? Does it want to be an action film? Does it want to be a drama? They want to mash it all together. Okay. But understand that basically those things will clash against you. And that's what happens here in Calamity Jane, which at the end of the day had me chuckling, because in a lot of ways Calamity Jane is a 2024 film that feels like it belongs in the old spaghetti west 1970s. That's what I was saying. I don't know if it would fit into the spaghetti western genre, but definitely the 1970s.
The 1970s were basically like a lot of those filmmakers are like going, I just want to do I want to do a western.
Yeah.
But they don't think like, well, yeah, you want to do a western, but what do you want your western to be? Do you want to be funny? Do you want to be an action film? Do you want to be a gore fest, a horror film?
And also, just because it needs to be said, some of the best Westerns, not all the time, but most of the best Westerns are not action films.
Yeah. Not
They're
like,
not action films. People think cowboys shoot 'em up, bang, bang. Oh, that equals action. But the best Western films are seldom action pictures.
yes. Because like the thing is like you have to be really careful about crossing your quote unquote genre barriers because it could work really well. Like say for example, like a film like Bone Tomahawk. Like Bone Tomahawk was a horror film when you actually think about it.
Yeah.
For
A Weird West.
a Weird West horror film.
Yeah.
But like it worked because they decided to go all the way into the horror element.
Well, they knew without a doubt what they wanted to be.
They wanted to be.
Yeah.
Here in Calamity Jane, it's just like what you said. They have these really cool moments of action. So hey, let's do more of that. Let's do more of that.
Yeah, and I do believe I don't think this movie suffered from the director not knowing what he wanted his film to be. I feel like ultimately this movie doesn't work as well as it should because he chose to make this an action film.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're operating with a lower budget, oftentimes it's best to just remove some of those over-the-top action sequences and stick to what these actors can do,
Mm-hmm.
even if you have to take action away because of budget reasons, whatever. We know Emily Bett Rickards can act.
Oh yeah.
In fact, I saw some people complaining about her acting. I don't know what they're talking about. I feel like this was very good work from her end. It wasn't the best, but it worked just fine for this type of film.
Yeah.
Because that's another strength of the movie for me is the interesting character types. Believe it or not, Tim Rosen, I believe is his name, who played the Sheriff Mason, was top notch. He was really, really good. The side players were better than some of the leads.
Some of the leads.
Priscilla Faya, who played Abigail, was mind-blowingly good.
Yeah, and she was just that borderline. She brought the borderline crazy just enough so that it's not over the top.
Yeah. I really enjoyed her performance. I liked Tim Rosen. There was another the I don't have his name in front of me, but the actor that played the Gravedigger was really good.
Yeah.
Stephen Amell as Wild Bill, I was a little suspicious of when I first heard about it. I was like, I don't know. I love Stephen Amell, but I don't know if he's gonna pull off a Wild Bill. He did a good Wild Bill.
I loved his delivery of basically saying like, "Are you gonna say thank you?"
Yeah,
because that is part of Wild Bill's mythos.
A little bit of a dick,
where he's a little bit of a dick,
yeah.
And yeah, one of the famous stories is like him telling people, "Hey, are you gonna say thank you? You just met Wild Bill," and he does it, and the way he delivered it, yeah. I'm like going, "Okay, I fully believe that Steve Amell can actually play a Wild Bill type of character," and it makes me wonder, like maybe if Steve Amell had the chance, would he play an actual Wild Bill character in a Wild Bill centric film?
I would love to see him play in a Western. Stephen Amell does not get enough credit. He's a very good actor. If people are not familiar with his work, his claim to fame or what he is most famous for is his 8-season run on the CW's Arrow.
Yes.
Now, people may snicker and say the Arrow was garbage. It actually wasn't for the first 2 seasons. First 3 seasons were actually really strong. It came out before the comic book craze.
Yes.
So it was doing its own thing. It pretty much set the standard for what we're getting today, even Marvel-wise. People don't realize that what really created this desire for connected stories
was Arrow.
Yeah. Arrow does not get enough credit, but they were doing it. And when people saw how well they were doing it over at the CW for a couple of years before it all fell apart, and they tried to do way too much, more than they can handle, because they just didn't have the skill set or the talent to do it over at the CW, they proved that there's an appetite for interconnected stories in this way.
Yeah.
And like I said, the first 3 seasons, especially the first 2 seasons of Arrow, are some of the best superhero television that we've been given, I'd say, within the last 15 years or so, without a doubt.
I always tell people, Arrow is kind of like Icarus, the still of Icarus.
Oh,
You got too
so
close
true.
to the sun, and then your wings just melted, and you fell.
Because it does fall apart.
It falls
like,
apart
horribly.
Because
so.
like my favorite superhero show during that time was Arrow for the first 3-4 seasons, because the writing was there. They focused on story.
And it's because of Amel's leadership. Once the franchise that they were trying to create over in the CW got far bigger than Stephen Amell, he was no longer able to control it creatively, because he can only control what was happening on his show. And once they started making all these spinoffs, I mean, I remember there was even a moment where he complained about the spinoffs. He's all like, what are they doing? How does this even work? They want me to be in this, which I don't have a problem with it. I think it would be fun, but how are they going to make this work with my storyline?
Yeah.
So he was always concerned with the protection of his show in terms of quality, not because of arrogance, not because of any type of ego. It was about just artistic integrity. So he comes from an interesting place, Stephen Amell.
Oh, yeah.
Meaning he understands quality production. And that's why I even gave this film a shot. Now, this is probably on the lower end of what he would probably do willingly. Maybe he owed someone a favor.
Well, when you think about like the main players in the movie itself, it makes sense that a lot of people would be negative towards this, because it has those connections to the CW. Especially with, like Emily Rickards being the lead.
Who is also from Arrow.
She's from Arrow. You have Steve Amell, who's from Arrow. You have a couple more like side actors that are from the CW, I guess it's a catalog of actors.
Yeah.
And so I can understand like a lot of people being negative on that. The thing that cracks me up, Mike, is like fans nowadays, the reason they jump all over CW actors when they're in there, saying, "Oh, look, it's going to be a really crap fest because like it's a CW actor." Steve Amell made Green Arrow cool.
Oh my
God.
God.
Even more cool than Batman.
Yeah.
And like for a time. And I'm like going, he's the same guy that basically now everyone shit talks about when he's in a product. And I'm like going,
it's because he's brutally honest about certain things, and people don't like honesty in today's environment.
But like, and think about that trait in itself is like Wild Bill. So that's why I'm like thinking about it. Like when it comes to this movie, I think I would love to have seen more of Steve Amell in a movie like this.
Well, hopefully he'll have another shot at doing a Western. That would be pretty cool.
I hope so too, because that ultimately, when I walked away from it, one of the side notes that I put is like, even though Stephen Amell's only in this for maybe, would you say 20 minutes of the film?
Yeah, the first act, and then he shows up in like a dream sequence?
Yeah, because he's used as a narrative tool for Jane's character growth.
I think it was between the second and third act?
Second and third,
typically where the character, all is lost. That's usually how the second act will end. All is lost. Something has happened. How are we going to make it through?
Yeah.
And I think that's when he appears.
He appears, yeah, because he appears. I remember in the beginning of the Badlands when she has a nightmare about him.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Then she has the dream when she is beaten down by Abigail, and essentially, Wild Bill gives her the pep talk, tells her to get up and everything, and prove her name, what her name is, what her legacy is.
Yeah, see, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, well, what is that legacy? What is that name? Why didn't you dig a little further into that myth?
Yeah.
Why don't you use some of those thematic elements to really make the story matter? Add some value, add some meaning to it. That's where the movie falters. They just didn't go deep enough. They were willing to play with the myth, but I'm like, listen, the damage is done. The people who are like canon or history babies, which unfortunately there are a lot of Western movie fans who are, I call them history babies.
Yeah.
They really get upset with historical inaccuracies, but they fail to understand that Westerns are inaccurate.
Oh yeah.
There has never been a Western you've ever watched. Well, let me go back on that a little bit. There are some now that try their best, but Westerns from their very conception were American ideological pieces designed at creating American myth.
Yes.
So none of them are pieces of history. They may align with historical aspects at times, but they're not history. So when a Western defies history, I never get mad.
I never get
Because
mad,
this
man.
is a movie and it's part of the Western genre and it isn't a documentary.
Plus, it makes you as the viewer focus on the fact about the creativity of the narrative. Then
Yeah.
you don't have to focus on the historical significance and everything else, and the realism of the story. You just have to focus on what movies are about. Movies are about entertaining at the end of the day.
Yep. Now, there were some people complaining I saw. I'm bringing this up just as so we can add a little more depth since we both enjoyed the movie for the most part. Some people were saying that the acting was really bad. I would disagree with that with our core players. Like,
Yes.
the handful of core players I felt were just fine. The background characters and some of the other faces that you would see pop in and pop out throughout the movie, they weren't that great.
They were not.
And sometimes there were cringe-worthy
Oh,
performances.
Yes.
But the core players were fine.
Yeah.
And that often happens with low-budget movies, specifically low-budget period pieces like Westerns,
Oh, yeah.
because of obvious reasons, set design, art direction. There's a lot of costuming there. So you'll see sometimes budgets skimp on
Mhm.
the background. And in a movie like this, you do see that.
And that's the thing where you see it the most is actually when you see the bit players. That's the thing I could see where they cut down on the budget, because honestly, the production value of the entire thing, I like the production design. I thought the costuming was done well.
Yeah.
More so than I was expecting. And then even like the production set designs, pretty much on par with, some higher budgeted Westerns. So that I was telling myself they had to have taken something like a budget hit somewhere. And I was like, casting.
Yeah.
That's where they took it.
And crafty.
Probably crafty.
No food for anyone while we're shooting.
We're going to make everyone grumpy on this set.
Listen, do you want to make a movie or do you want to eat?
You want to eat.
That's how I run things.
You run things.
So the viewing experience isn't the greatest. Unfortunately, it's the only place you can really watch this.
Is Tubi, yeah.
Is on Tubi. They only offer a 720p, so it's old school HD.
Oh, yeah. That was
And that might be some of my issues, David. Maybe these weren't digital mats we were looking at. Maybe it's bandwidth issues. Sometimes when you're watching things that are condensed, encoded with the 720p codecs, oftentimes you don't get the full impact of the image. We know this, David, by experience.
by experience, yeah.
We've worked on films where we're like, wow, it looks so beautiful where we're editing it. Oh my God.
What do we do?
It's 720p. Prank caller. So, 720p hasn't been the official HD quality for a better part of 15 years.
Yeah, for almost going almost 20 years, Mike.
Maybe it has been. Yeah, I think you're right.
If you think about it, the last film me and you have ever worked on, 720p was that was, even when we were working last, 720p was like, oh no, you got to go 4K.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's what I cracked up at too, was like looking at Calamity Jane, and the fun that I had as a filmmaker was thinking about it and looking at going, okay, where's the production hits that I can see just as a professional, and putting that into stock of what I think about the film, because that's what you have to do when you look at a film like this. You can't, as we said earlier, you can't judge this film on other high-grade films. So you have to actually take into stock, okay, this is probably why that looks bad, because they had to take a cut, they had to take a budget cut. That's what you have to do. and the 720p thing, I was like going, yeah, that's probably one of the bigger reasons why we only see this on Tubi.
Yeah.
because
They do have video on demand, and it is available on Amazon. So you can not purchase it. You can rent it for $1.99, and it says it's HD. I don't want to buy it right now, but I am wondering if the Amazon version, I'm going to do some research and I'll add it to the details when we post this show to our feeds so that people will have that information. Because I know I'm not a stickler for 4K, but I am a stickler for a minimum of 1080.
well, especially since like nowadays the industry standard, because we all, even as mass audiences, you are tailored to like what we see now. So like if we were to actually look at, I see this a lot when people go back and look at, say, films from the 80s or the 70s, right? And they go, man, it looks rough. And I'm like going, because it's how it's shot, what it's shot on. All those digital, artifacts you're seeing is because they had to do a transfer of it.
Right.
That's why it looks the way it is.
You're talking about the older films?
Yeah, the older films.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Calamity Jane kind of suffers from, is the fact that
I don't, obviously not a transfer, but it's just the lack of
almost film quality.
Yeah, because of it being 720p.
Because of 720p.
I'm sure they probably shot this in 4K. You're a fool nowadays if you're filming anything that's not at minimum of 4K, but that doesn't mean that's going to be the exhibition format.
Exactly. That doesn't mean that that's how it's going to be transferred over, so that the person that's distributing it is going to put it out that way.
Yeah. I mean, it isn't unwatchable. It's just fine on Tubi, although I had some problem. I have a big 4K television that I use for screening films.
Oh, it's more...
And it didn't look super great. That's where I was having issues with some of those backdrops that didn't look real. But then when I watched this, I watched the second half of the movie. I watched on my computer while I was working on some notes on the side, and it was a lot easier on the eyes.
Yes. That's what I did. I actually saw it on our TV, which does 4K and everything else, all the fancy stuff, and you can see more of the digital artifacts within the film, right? But if I saw, then I went back and I saw the same images on my phone, and I don't see them as bad.
Yeah, that's an HD thing. The HD is on the low end.
Yes,
and it's just that's a shame. And perhaps that's just a Tubi thing, but I will get some answers before I put this show out on demand. So overall, I enjoyed this film. I did not hate it. There wasn't a moment where, which does happen a lot nowadays, where I'm like 15 minutes into the movie and I wish I never started watching it. There wasn't that moment.
No,
I was worried a little bit during the opening 5 minutes because, again, some of the background players, some of the side characters that are not important are not that good.
Yes.
And I was getting nervous because it was making Emily Bett Rickards look bad as well. Once she was able to be on her own, she did just fine. In fact, I thought she played Calamity Jane very well. I mean, it is hard to play Calamity Jane, in my opinion, in this day and age if you've watched Deadwood, because the actress that plays Calamity Jane in Deadwood is so good in that role. So just for me, it's my own bias. It's very hard for me to watch anyone else play Calamity Jane. But that being said, Emily Bett Rickards did a good job in the role.
Yeah, she did. I mean,
I just would have liked to see her act more.
Yeah, where everyone constantly rags on this film about her performance. I'm like going, you guys aren't looking at the scenes where we really do see where she shines, where she is by herself, where she doesn't have a lot of the bit players around her that take her down. Because just like you said, that opening scene, those two other people that die quick in the very beginning, they're not that great. You can kind of tell that basically, I want to say that they probably were day players that got just sent from a casting agency, and they were just chosen randomly. I said, yeah, let's send this guy over here. And hey, more props to him. Hey, you got the job done. But when you have that lack of quality around you, that's going to bring an actor's performance down.
Yeah. So really quick, let me read through some of these just so people can get another view. Poor acting and direction is what put me off. Not sure why the first review had it as a 10. Perhaps their relative who enjoyed the family show. That's not even a complete sentence or properly written. Not even the arrow can save this disaster. Really quite cliche and boring. Overall, the film just feels sort of odd, like it's unpolished. Well, odd and unpolished are two different words with two different meanings. Therefore, I'm going to review your review and say you suck.
And plus, using the word odd and unpolished is just a broad stroke.
Yeah,
that is not a proper way to criticize.
Odd, like it's unpolished. Unpolished doesn't make something odd. It makes it unpolished.
Guess what? There's a lot of good films.
Oddities. David, oddities make something odd.
Yes.
I hate people. Why are people stupid, David?
There's a lot of good movies that are odd and unpolished. So if you're saying it's odd and unpolished, you're saying that's good then, right? Because there's a lot of other movies that people love that are odd and unpolished.
Yeah. I would agree that in here they say it's cliche. There are cliches, absolutely.
Yeah.
That kind of comes with the territory when you're dealing with B Westerns.
Mm-hmm.
Skip this mess and settle for a rewatch of Deadwood. That isn't a viable solution to a problem because you're telling someone to watch a whatever.
A different show completely.
Yeah. So there's a lot of negativity here, and that's why I didn't want to jump into the fray and start just dismantling this movie, because I'm reading these reviews, and certainly there's some validity to some of what they're saying, but does that make this movie a 1 star?
Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely does not. My grade falls probably between 55 and 60%. I'm going to go a little higher and say it's 60 just to be fair, because the movie does what it set out to do. It was designed to be an action film centered around the character of Calamity Jane, and it does just that. There are no moments where I scratch my head and wonder why you did something like that. There are no moments where I think the writing was awful. There are moments where I believe things could have been polished. As you said, David.
Yeah.
There are certainly things that are not stellar within the picture itself, as I mentioned, the color grade. Some of the acting isn't fantastic from the background players, but overall, the movie is enjoyable. I will say this. If you are a Western fan, you probably will like the movie for the reasons that we have shared. If you're a casual Western fan and more of a movie person, you might not
jive with it.
You might not like it. It might not sync with you, and you might not appreciate the things that we have brought to the surface.
Yeah.
David, go ahead.
My score for this one, I'm around where you are. I gave this one at the end a 62 because I can't agree with people's assessment online saying that it is a 40 or a 50, because that would mean that the film fails. And I'm like going, no, it's not that bad. It's basically, does it need to be polished? Absolutely. That's why, most of the spaghetti westerns in the past that people love nowadays, they need to be polished up.
How dare you, David?
Yeah. Come on, Mike. Me and you have covered some.
Oh, I know. I'm just
love
joking.
them. We love them, but we're like, you need to polish that up just a tad bit.
Sometimes you can't polish turds.
You can't polish turds.
Even when you polish a turd, it's still a turd.
But that's the thing. This isn't a turd.
No.
Definitely not a turd.
It's not a turd. It really isn't.
And that's what people that are saying like it's a 40 or it's a 1 star, it's a turd. I'm like going, no, it's not a turd. Because like at the end of the day, when you take a look at what they did, they stuck to a narrative. Their story from beginning to end was easy to follow. Their performances by their lead actress or actor carried the film. You had a really nice guest starring from a major actor like Steve Amell. And then also you had like some surprise performances throughout the entire film that stood out, like the Gravedigger. The actor who played the Gravedigger was really cool. I mean, that second act between him and Emily really carried the film between when they were in the Badlands. And it led to some of the better scenes. Like my favorite scene in the film was the scene where Calamity is like sleeping and she ends up killing 3 people.
Yeah, there's a great moment.
And she kills one guy, kills another guy, tries to shoot the other guy. Gun clicks, guy's laughing, and you just see Calamity Jane pull up the rifle underneath her coat and blast the guy. I'm like, that was a really cool scene.
That's a good Western gag.
That's a good Western gag because you expect that.
Yeah.
So overall, I would grade this as a 62. Is it worth actually a Western fan's viewing? Sure. If you are a Western fan like myself and Flores, you're gonna probably enjoy this to some degree.
Yeah. If you're just a movie person that you can, I don't know what I was going to say.
The problem is if you're just a movie person, because
I think you have to be a fan of the Western in order to enjoy this picture.
Yeah,
if you're looking for a movie to watch on a Wednesday night, you're probably not going to dig it.
Yeah, because like you're going to be so inundated and saturated by other things that you could be watching, right?
Yeah, right. Yep. All right. This brings us to the end of our discussion. I want to remind everyone to find us on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/RainManDigital, you can pledge anywhere between $1 to $5, and you'll gain additional. Let me backtrack on that. Jesus. If you pledge a minimum of $4 or more a month, you'll gain access to additional Western-themed discussions every single month. It helps us continue to do these shows. It helps you because you get more content. Also, find us on iTunes as well as Spotify. Leave us a review and a thumbs up. We do need those reviews. I get so disappointed when I look at our downloads, and our downloads are so great, and then I look at our ratings and review, and they're so sucky.
They got to remember, Mike.
And I don't mean sucky as in people hate us. I mean, there's just not enough there.
They don't say thank you.
Yeah. Yes. And please don't shoot me in the back for saying that. Please. All right. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.